My name is Zach Grant, and I don't want to do disability ministry or be a disability minister, at least not as a job. The job I want to do is to lead people in the church in doing disability ministry. And I know that there are probably a lot of volunteers in the church now who are doing the work. We're like, you don't do it, we do it. Well, imagine if there were more of you. So, I want to do a video series taking you from being a person who thinks that disability ministry would be a good idea, but I don't know how to get started, or that it's wonderful for people who are called into that type of work, but I could never do it. I want you to go from there to you being the people in your church who are considered the disability ministry people. And I want to do that because it will be fun. It will be a joyful, rich part of your life, and it will be good for the church. I think that the church needs the gifts of people with disabilities. A lot of the gifts that we think really make the church great end up actually blinding us to the important things. In Luke 6, Jesus gives blessings and woes. And Jesus says some things will be blessings that I definitely wouldn't want. Blessed are you when you are poor, when you're hungry, when you weep, when people hate you. And he says some things are woeful that I definitely would want. Being rich, well-fed, laughing, and held in high esteem. One of the things that I take out of that is that we are really bad at knowing the things that are really valuable. I think that some of the things that might make a good business, money, the smartest people, high efficiency, are not the things that will make us a great church. And some of the things that I would want to avoid in business, vulnerability, a slower pace, dependence, mystery, gentleness, these are some of the most important things for the church to hold close. So at this point, I don't know if this is a concern for you, but the question might arise, are we just using people with disabilities for the benefit of the church? I don't know. I know that there are wonderful benefits to all of my relationships. Friends, spouse, family. There are a lot of good things that I get out of those relationships. I know, though, that I don't really think about them in that way. Those relationships seem like good things in and of themselves, even if a lot of good things flow out of them. I think that Jesus does things in pretty much the same way. What's the most important thing? Jesus asked. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. This pretty much sums up the law and the prophets. The Apostle Peter says, love covers a multitude of sins. So we'll talk some about all the wonderful things that come out of doing ministry with people with disabilities. But really, it's just part of that intrinsically valuable thing that God sets before us. It might help to talk about it negatively. We're not really being phony or just reaching out to people with disabilities because they're disabled. We're just stopping the things that are actively getting in the way and keeping those relationships from naturally forming. We're just no longer being the worst. So step one, stop being the worst. Great video so far. So step two is also maybe not a terribly profound bit of advice, but step two is just be friends. So, okay, here's how you're going to get started. Today, you are a disability ministry person. The thing that you need to do disability ministry is to become friends with a person with disabilities. I think that this really is the evergreen advice. There may be some change in strategies and emphasis over the years, but I think that we can't get too far off by starting with friendship. Now, hold up. Why is it different for people with disabilities here? Why aren't all my friendships considered ministry? we might be getting dangerously close to wisdom here. Is it that all I have to do ministry for anyone is to be their friend? I think in essence that is the case, which, I'm sure that there are biases creeping in from the relational focus of much of the ministry that I've come from and worked with over the years. But I think I stand by that, especially when we qualify it as good friendships. And then the question arises, what are good friendships? Well, that could be the content of the next dozen videos. But we're trying to get you going today. You don't need to have perfect friendships. Perfection can sometimes be our enemy here. And a lot of people have avoided relationships with people with disabilities or avoided engagement in formal disability ministries because they were afraid that they didn't know enough. And the best thing about friendships is that they start and that they get better over time. So, how do we get this to be actually good, actionable advice? I mean, most of you know something about making friends already. Why do you need my advice? Again, we're coming dangerously close to wisdom here. Mostly, you don't need my advice. And many of the things that you already know about being friends with anyone are the best steps that you can take to developing friendships with people with disabilities. I think people most of the time just need to be empowered or given permission not to be experts at the things that they're doing. That has been one of the most generally helpful ideas that I was ever put onto in terms of building more inclusive communities for people with disabilities. Bill Gaventa, who is one of the OG disability ministry guys, said essentially, flip the question around. When you're asking about how to do something related to people with disabilities, first, ask what you would do for anyone and start there. Just resolve not to be the worst and not do it for the person with disabilities. All right, though. Let's try to get a little specific. How do I know that people are my friends? They come to my birthday party. They call me to check in on me. I see them and I talk to them outside of regularly scheduled programming. When I'm sad about something, they feel sad with me. The same for when I'm happy about something. They try to understand me even when I'm being difficult. They invite me to do all of those same things for them. They're reciprocal. So, chances are, you already know some people with disabilities. It is the largest minority and it contains every other minority. It's a minority that we can join anytime by age or accident. Finding people with disabilities to be friends with is not probably going to be a terrible obstacle. In the case that it is, it may be that we need to visit Rule 1, which I say somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is that we may have to look at practices that we have adopted quite naturally to avoid all the scariness of weakness. People don't like weakness, and they don't like vulnerability, though they are both probably good for you. It makes sense that you would want to avoid them enough that I don't really have to explain it that much. Just suffice it to say, don't be scared. Or even if you're scared, do it anyway. Not only will it be okay, but it will be good for you, and no one will mind. Good places to find people with disabilities are your local disability ministries. We will see you at all the things. I also include within that non-religious nonprofits like Best Buddies or Special Olympics. So here is the thing. If you are actively seeking out people with disabilities like I was, here are some of the things that I think I did wrong, or at least I didn't know out of the gate and I wish I did. So this is going to seem like it's contradictory, but I think that it's maybe just a little nuanced. So people with disabilities, like anyone, want to be approached with as much dignity as possible. It feels undignified if people talk about me to those around me as though I can't speak on my behalf or make my decisions for myself. So it's a good practice when approaching people with disabilities to address them directly and engage with them first and foremost as a person with agency. However, parents or caregivers of any child develop muscles to advocate for the people in their care. Parents and caregivers of children with disabilities are heavy lifters. They are used to fighting for their kids' safety and well-being. There is, within that advocate kit, a certain very justifiable suspicion. So that's something to contend with when developing that friendship. On one hand, the person with disabilities is to be treated with as much dignity and respect for their agency and independence. Also, their parent or caregiver is absolutely a gatekeeper to be respected. This is even true with adults with disabilities. Adults with cognitive disabilities, though their limitations may resemble in some ways the developmental stages of young people who are neurotypical, we want to be very sensitive to the fact that they are not children, and we ought not to approach them as such. Yet, even with a trained sensitivity to that, it's important to acknowledge the appropriate suspicion of the caregiver advocate. You have to earn your way through that. And I think that the most organic way to think about that is that disability ministry, again, as with most friendships and with most other ministries, is a family ministry. Our relationships, I think, should involve the other relationships that we take part in. My friends know my kids. I know my friends' kids. If I meet a person with disabilities for the first time at church or at a Special Olympics track meet, I ask about their family or their teacher. I try to make it the natural part of conversation that I would, just inquiring about the relationship someone has as a natural part of getting to know them. But I've got a value for their role as an advocate in the back of my mind. And so, if I'm meeting somebody at a Special Olympics track meet, I'm first asking them questions about the 100 meter, but also I might say, do you have people cheering you on here? Is your family around? Or maybe their teacher is there. It's a class of students from a special education classroom. Oh, you're so-and-so's teacher. Nice to meet you. This looks like a great class. I hope it also goes without saying that you're not just lurking about at some of these events, but that you're going through the proper channels. You're there as a volunteer or an invited guest or something. You might go there as a representative of a welcome organization, or you might go there cheering on some specific person. You don't want to be a lurker because that leads to being perceived as a creeper. I don't want to scare anyone off, and the reality is that most of us are going to start with people that we already know, because people with disabilities are everywhere. And it's a testament to the need for disability ministry that the question of finding or meeting could ever precede the question of how to be friends with a person with disabilities. So, okay, this video is getting long, and we've only just gotten to doing anything like friendship with our friends with disabilities. Good news is, this part isn't that hard either, and it should go fairly quickly. I think the thing to do is get to know them by asking questions about themselves, just like we would with anyone. And failing the ability to do that, like if they don't communicate verbally and you're not sure where to start, you might in that case ask their family or caregiver what the best way to get to know them is. And once you get to know them, I think the best thing to do is invite them to stuff. What that stuff is really just whatever you or they are interested in. With this, I think it's another thing that seems like it's contradictory until you break it down. You just need to use common sense, but also you have to push against common sense. Common sense might tell me that inviting my friend who likes professional wrestling and hates poetry readings, it might tell me what to invite them to. You just invite them to what they'd be into. However, there are many things that we would commonly assume someone is into or would get something out of, and and we're dead wrong. I might be concerned that a friend with disabilities wouldn't be into something because of their physical or mental limitations, but I'd be wrong though. Often that reveals how just terribly dependent we are on our intellect for understanding the value of so many of the things that we're involved in. How much of a Sunday service at a church is the value in what I intellectually receive from the sermon or the rest of the service, and how much of it is in the hug or the eye contact I receive? How much of the value of my being in a board meeting is my intellectual ability to come up with the sharp solution, and how much is just in my perspective, which includes my limitations, my gifts, my backgrounds, etc. So get to know people. Invite them to stuff. Go to the stuff that they invite you to. This is just the rich stuff of life. This is the interconnective tissue of churches and communities. Learning how to be a good friend to my friends with disabilities has formed me on what it means to be a good friend, which I think is one of the foundational elements to being like Jesus. I'm not saying that I'm there, but when I think of the things that have taught me about being like Jesus, I mean, sure school, sure church, but also my friends with disabilities. And it's been significant enough that I'm here trying to convince you to do it. Some people should study what I studied in school. Other people should study other things or not go to school. I think, though, everyone should make room in their lives for relationships with people with disabilities and learn the things that those friendships will teach them. So if you're still here, we'll probably do some other videos about this stuff over the next few weeks. I'm sure that I've gotten some stuff wrong here, and you'll tell me about it in the comments, or better yet, you'll come show me how it's done. I'm really a disability ministry enthusiast, not really an expert. So I'd love to hear what's working for you. Also, I'm not a person with disabilities, nor do I have anyone in my nuclear family who is. So certainly take all that I say with a grain of salt. And I know that there are some parents or persons with disabilities or siblings who have just a tremendous amount of knowledge that I don't have. And I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to support us, like and comment below, and I'll try to respond. Thanks.